Madam Chair, you have a live mic.
Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to the April Basin Board meeting. Call the meeting to order. If you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning again. It's nice to have everyone joining us here for our Basin Board meeting. I'd like to wish everyone a happy National Arbor Day. And I would also like to congratulate Vice Chair Waters, Mr. Hill, Ms. McLeod, Mr. Romano, and Ms. Smith for their recent confirmations by the Florida Senate. Congratulations to each of you, and I look forward to continuing to work with you as we serve the community and in the Basin. For those joining us remotely, thank you for your continued interest and support. And as a reminder, today's proceedings are accessible via Zoom, as well as Collier TV and the district's website. Couple of housekeeping items for you. Board members, please make sure your microphone is on and that you speak into the mic so online attendees can hear you. If you turn your head while you're speaking to another board member, please drag the mic with you so that we can make sure that your comments are captured. And please try to get as close to the microphone as possible. To be recognized, please use the buttons on the dais. And I have a screen here that I can see everyone and call on you as to be recognized. For those here in person, if you would like to comment on an agenda item, please complete a speaker card from the lobby and bring it up front to Mr. Troy Miller that's sitting to my right. If you're joining by Zoom, use the raise the hand features and Troy's will call on you. And if you're participating via phone, *9 raises your hand and *6 mutes and unmutes. We have Brad Jackson in the room here for Lisa Keeler, who will be joining us by Zoom. Agenda revisions, Brad, do we have any?
No, there are no agenda revisions.
Okay, great. Are there any agenda item abstentions by the board members? I'll poll each one of you for any abstentions or disclosures on the agendas. Vice Chair Waters?
None for me.
Mr. Hill?
No.
Ms. McLeod?
Me.
Mr. Romano? Ms. Smith?
No.
And I do not have any. Okay, we're going to now consider approval of the minutes of the February 23rd, 2024 meeting. If there are no changes or additions to the minutes, I'd like a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Do I have a motion?
I so move.
Okay, Mr. Hill moves to approve the minutes. Ms. Smith seconds. I'll now conduct a vote. Vice Chair Waters?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. McLeod? Mr. Romano?
Yes.
And Ms. Smith?
Yes.
And I vote yes, and that's a unanimous approval of the minutes. Okay, now we're going to go to Zoom for Ms. Keeler's Basin Administrator's Report. Lisa?
Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. Today, you might hear some messages from our presenters about our preparations for wet season. And as many consider that our busy tourist season is coming to an end and the pace might be slowing down, let me assure you that's quite different for us. We at the Basin and the district are approaching our busy season. One of the many ways that we do that is to participate in our annual Hurricane Freddy exercise. Our emergency managers at the district have simulated a very challenging storm for us that is meant to flex our muscle, practice what we know, as well as give us scenarios that require us to think out of the box and test us. This annual exercise helps prepare us for what may come this summer. So even as we have been preparing for today's board meeting, our team has also been preparing for this annual exercise next week. We've been dusting off our SOP, testing equipment, ensuring each staff member knows their emergency role and how to execute their assignments. It's a challenging exercise every year, and we always learn something new, but it also ensures that we are ready to face whatever comes our way so that we can best support this community. I feel it's important for you, Madam Chair, and our board members to know the hard work that your Basin team puts in to prepare for this exercise and for our upcoming storm season. Everyone works so hard and their dedication is commendable. Madam Chair, if you or the board members have any questions about our preparations for wet season or our annual exercise, I'm happy to address them.
Are there any questions from the board members? Or Ms. Keeler on the exercise or preparations? Mr. Hill, did you have any?
No questions.
All right. No questions from the board, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, that moves us to general public comment. We are ready to hear from the public. There are 2 opportunities during the meeting for you to address anything that's not on the agenda. We'll start with anyone who is here in person, followed by those joining us remotely. Troy, is there anyone signed up for public comment?
Madam Chair, I have no speaker slips and no hands raised on Zoom at this time.
Okay, great. Then we'll move on to our first item on the agenda, which is the capital project update for the communications tower by Mr. Brad Jackson. Brad?
All right. Excuse me. Good morning, Madam Chair, board members. Brad Jackson. I'm pleased to be here to talk to you again about the capital program for the Big Cypress Basin. I was just here last month or in February and gave an update on all of our different projects. But I want to come back this month and really give a highlight of one of our most important projects and a milestone that we've recently reached with it. So that project is our communications tower. It's an addition to our communication system for the district. And what it really does is it increases our resiliency to operate our flood control system in all types of conditions during rainy season, during hurricanes, during all sorts of adverse conditions. It removes us from the cellular system that we rely on now, which obviously can go out during a storm event and everything. So this will really change the dynamic of how our system functions and is extremely important for us to continue the operations even during a storm event. So the update here today is really, we've been under design for this for a year or so, and we're rounding the corner and finishing those construction plans. So just to highlight a couple of key points from the tower itself to reorient you, it's just north of Lake Trafford, as shown in the screen here, and it's a great addition to our system. A couple of things I wanted to highlight is that it does comply with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife recommended best practices for tower construction, meaning it's a self-standing tower. It has the FAA approved lighting and motion activated lights to make sure that we're not, they're not on. It's not a big flashlight out there that it's on 24 hours a day, and that we will be doing groundbreaking outside of peak bird nesting season. Make sure that we minimize any effects and with our construction footprint. So like I said, we were finishing a milestone of this project, and our design was completed this last spring. So our construction plans are finished, and our next step is basically to advertise this for construction bids, and we'll be in the process over the next couple of months preparing that package to put it out for public bid and then receiving those bids so we can start construction later this fall. So we're anticipating that advertisement will happen in July of this year, and then the contract agreement and execution, we're anticipating that happening a couple months later in September, and then construction there will follow. It'll take a couple years is what's right now is in the schedule to build that. And then once the tower is built, we still have the IT equipment, all the microwave dishes, and connect everything up with everything else that we own at the district. But hopefully, if we keep everything on track here and the construction moves smoothly, we should have a online and a completely different flood control system by this wet season of 2027. So for me, as the water manager that operates it during storm events, this is a great milestone for us to get this done. The current cost estimate is about $8.5 million for this project, and it is fully funded. It's in our capital program, and it's funded over several fiscal years. And so that's really the high level overview that I wanted to give and the important milestone that we've now reached. I've got a very short presentation today for the one project, since we've done the lion's share of the design work is already completed. So this is just where the tower will go. So in a few years, it will look very different in that location. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Brad. Questions for Mr. Jackson? Go ahead, Andy.
Brad, a couple of things. What's the range coverage for the tower?
So sure. So this tower will connect. It will cover all of BCB, but it will use some of our existing tower connections. So it will go all the way down to Picayune Strand. So that's 20-ish, 30 miles, I think, going off of memory, and it connects to other towers. So it really connects a missing link that we don't have.
Okay, so the full range of the basin area of responsibility is covered.
Yes, it'll cover everything that we have in the basin today and any future expansions that we may,
Next question, would you be able to manage the system when it's fully constructed, being outside of the basin territory yourself or whoever would be the operator?
So we already have that capability
Okay,
today. The difference is that right now we rely on a cellular connection rather than our microwave system, and the cellular system relies on a third party rather than our own infrastructure. So right now we can operate it from different places, including the control room across the state. But the main operations and all those decisions are made locally.
okay. So I was just wondering if, so you were physically were not present, you were out hiding from a storm and in Minnesota or someplace, you'll be able to manage things.
Yes, we are able to see the system from our different computers, even if we're traveling. But there is a control room that manages everything 24/7.
Thank you.
Also, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions from the board? Go ahead, PJ.
Brad, maybe more for the public. Why does it take so long to build this from now until 2027?
So it's a big project. So just having to fabricate all the different steel pieces, and there's the design build type project. So the selected contractor, there still is a design component for the footings and the foundations, and still has to do some more engineering to finish up the actual erection, of the product itself. But it just takes a long time to get through the process to build it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? This is one that is such a huge project for the basin, and it's so important to everything that we do. I'm really looking forward to this one getting going and getting finished so that we can put it into operation. That's great. Is there any public comment on this item, Troy?
No, ma'am.
Okay, no public comment. Any further board comment? I don't see any, so we'll move on to the next item. Okay, the next item is an overview of the Basin Land Management Projects with Rory Feeney and Ryan Brown. Rory?
Good morning and thank you. Again, my name is Rory Feeney. I'm the Land Resources Bureau Chief at the South Florida Water Management District. We've got a lot to cover today. So I brought some water. We've got a lot of different projects we'll be reviewing. Once I go through all these different projects, I'll be handing over the presentation to Ryan Brown, at which point he'll talk about the tree management program for the basin. So as an overview, the Land Resources Bureau is responsible for the land management and vegetation management across 16 counties. Our work area is broken up into 5 different regions. Each region has its own unique habitat and its own unique projects. Now, the West Coast regional staff, with support from the other regions, are responsible for maintaining the ecological function across 82,000 acres and 134 miles of canals within the Big Cypress Basin. One of the largest projects that we're responsible for is the Picayune Strand Restoration Project and the vegetation management associated with that project. As you all know, the 1960s, more than 85 square miles was drained in Western Collier County for a development called the Southern Golden Gate Estates. Road construction and new canals were developed, reducing the aquifer and storage, disrupting native plant communities, increasing wildfires, but the development eventually failed, and what was left behind was a highly disturbed habitat. Restoring these natural areas is all about removing those impacts. And to date, 90% of the old roads and 98% of the logging trams have been degraded, and over 60% of the canals have been backfilled. Pump stations are working to rehydrate the wetlands, and Picayune is now home to panthers, black bears, bald eagles, wood storks, and red cockaded woodpeckers. But unfortunately, there's also a lot of invasive plant species there as well. Brazilian pepper is the most dominant invasive species. And in that photo in the lower left, that's actually Ryan there, in that photo shows a Brazilian pepper thicket and just how thick and tall these invasive plants can get if left unchecked. It occupies about 14,000 acres of the project footprint, which is about 25% of that area. Our vegetation management efforts have been tracking westward with the construction. So as the construction is moving west, from east to west, so are our vegetation management efforts. And this photo here shows on the right the different units and the construction and non-construction footprints. The non-construction footprint is like the surrounding woods, and the construction footprint are the former road segments. The chart on the left shows what we had planned to do this fiscal year and what we've accomplished thus far. So in the construction footprint, we plan to do 5,000 acres of exotic vegetation management, and thus far we've done about 2,200 acres. We plan to do 9,500 acres this fiscal year, and thus far we've done about 5,300 acres. Now, we're a little bit behind schedule because of all the rain that we've gotten during this dry season, but we've been very creative and doing some adaptive management, going to where the areas are higher. We've done a lot of work to the north. Our work has been a little bit limited to the south, but hopefully we'll be able to get some more invasive plant management done as the waters ebb and flow. And what we'll be targeting out there is Brazilian pepper and Kogan grass. Switching to the Corkscrew Regional Ecosystem Watershed, otherwise called CREW, which spans across 60,000 acres and is straddled between Collier and Lee counties. CREW serves as a habitat for some of the most protected species in the country. And at the same time, it provides opportunities for the public to get back in touch with nature. CREW is everything from a living classroom to a critical part of groundwater recharge for more than 1 million residents in Southwest Florida. CREW is comprised of the following areas: Flint Pen Strand, Bird Rookery Swamp, Audubon's Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary, Corkscrew Marsh, and Camp Keys Strand. We couldn't be as successful in land management without the close coordination and cooperation of our partners, including the CREW Trust and the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. The CREW Land and Water Trust was formed in 1989 as a nonprofit organization to coordinate the land acquisition and land management and public use of the 60,000 acre watershed. Staff and volunteers from CREW Trust provide environmental education, outreach, guided tours, public use facility maintenance, volunteer coordination, and land management support. While FWC provides prescribed burning efforts on that area with us, managing hunting season, and also a law enforcement presence around the year. As I mentioned, the CREW area provides a wealth of nature-based recreational activities. As you see depicted on this slide, hiking, biking, hunting, fishing, and on and on. On average, over 50,000 people visit CREW annually, but that average is quickly increasing. Last year, we had 65,000 visitors at CREW, and we're on track to getting close to 75,000 visitors this year. Those 75,000 visitors access CREW at designated points or gates. Each of those points are maintained by district staff to ensure that the public have a safe and enjoyable recreational experience. And this photo shows some of the hardworking volunteers installing benches at the CREW Marsh parking lot. This year alone, we're expected to have about 3,000 volunteer hours at CREW. So now I'll turn your attention to the Bird Rookery Swamp. So this is in the southern portion of CREW. The trail was originally built for logging of cypress more than half a century ago. The system now offers 12 miles of hiking and biking, including a 1,500-foot boardwalk. The swamp is home to alligators, otters, Florida panthers, bobcats, and white-tailed deer. And in fact, this area is listed as a biodiversity hotspot by FWC and is home to more than 122 bird species. Now, I know some of the board members may be familiar with this, this photo. This is a really interesting project that we got to work on a couple of years ago. This is the crossing at Bird Rookery Swamp Trail that was damaged after Hurricane Irma. What was there before were these very strong, stout beams that were left from the old logging years, more than half a century ago. But the support and the rock underneath those beams got washed away after the hurricane. And we had thought, how should we fix it? Should we get something in there that's like metal or concrete and just, is just going to be impervious to any future degradation like that? But we got creative. We wanted to use the old material. We wanted to incorporate the new construction design. So in that photo there, you'll see that there's also some of the old material that was there, still strong, with concrete sheet piles and modern day construction techniques that will, provide this for the public for many years to come. And it's also aesthetically very pleasing. Now, the boardwalk at Bird Rookery Swamp is one of the best ways to see the area. It gets a lot of usership from both two-footed and four-footed animals alike. Over the years, the boardwalk has begun showing signs of age. And while we've done our best to repair the damaged boards and railings, the substructure is at a point where it needs to be entirely replaced. So we'll be working with district engineers and Big Cypress Basin funding to design the new boardwalk this year and reconstruct the boardwalk next year. In the meantime, we have some small repairs that are going to be occurring next week. We'll have to shut down the boardwalk for just a few days while we shore up some of those beams. Once all of these projects are done with the boardwalk, we plan to expand the parking lot associated with that area. And this is just a conceptual overhead drawing of that parking area that we intend to expand to the east. And we'll be adding a pavilion, a kiosk, small shelter, and a bathroom in fiscal year 25-26. We've also replaced 7 culverts around the trail this year. Those culverts serve to equalize the water in and out of the swamp. And, we periodically have to go around and check the condition of these culverts and replace them as needed. So we did 7 this past year, and we anticipate doing additional culverts next year. Switching back to invasive vegetation management. The district utilizes an integrated pest management approach to dealing with invasive exotic plants and animals. IPM includes using multiple tools in concert to minimize impacts, minimize costs, and maximize the benefits to the ecosystem. Those tools that we use include the use of herbicide, mechanical methods, prescribed fire, and biological control. Currently, the district has contractors targeting Melaleuca and Kogan grass in the Crew area. We've already completed work in Lake Trafford, and we're moving into Flint Penn Strand very soon. Prescribed burning is probably the most cost-effective IPM tool that we have in our toolbox. They can provide the same benefit as wildfire, but of much less risk. These burns promote flowering and fruiting of plant species, improve the nutritional quality and nutrient cycling of soils, creates a mosaic habitat, and prevents the accumulation of highly flammable dead vegetation. The process to implement a fire is detailed and well thought out. Certified burn bosses must consider numerous environmental and climate conditions that are listed on this slide here. Every week throughout the year, the burn managers wake up and figure out, how can we burn today? But often we have some limiting factors like, the weather conditions and winds to take into account. And here are the burn units or the plan to burn the area around Corkscrew Marsh. And these are the burn areas and units that we plan to burn this fiscal year around Bird Rookery Swamp. Like I said, we have to work around these weather and water conditions and wind conditions. It's been a really wet, dry season, so our burns are somewhat smaller. You flash back a little while ago, it was too dry to burn, and so forestry was not issuing any burn authorizations. But this year we are getting the burn authorizations, but our units are a little bit smaller. We've burned 11, not counting the burn that's actually going off today. I got an email from my burn manager, our regional manager, Joe Bazzo, that we're burning today in crew. So right now we're up to 11 burns, total of 181 acres, and an average burn size of 16.45 acres. Switching to willows, right? We've heard the Audubon Society talk about their program. And while Carolina willow is a native species, this shrubby plant has grown aggressively over the years due to ecological changes. Following Audubon Society's success with mechanically shredding willows in their stands, we decided to replicate their efforts in Corkscrew Marsh. We began a partnership with FWC in 2021 to contract out shredding and mulching of hardwood plant species within the marsh. We were able to mechanically remove 16.5 acres and 10.1 acres in both 21 and 22 using FWC funding. And with Big Cypress Basin funding, we were able to remove 18.1 acres in 2023. For next year, we plan to do about 20 or more acres of willow removal. And you can see off in the distance in the photo on the left, just how the willow creates this monoculture that shades out native vegetation and is not well utilized by wildlife. And the photo on the right shows that the willow and the hardwoods have been removed, allowing the natural recruitment of vegetation to move in and for wildlife utilization. Now talking about aquatic weeds. Aquatic weeds like hydrilla and water lettuce can impact flood control structures, damage habitat, and interfere with navigation. Water hyacinth, for example, can double in population size in about 2 weeks due to its quick reproduction and plant development. The fast growth rate leads to dense mat formations and can clog waterways and limits flood control and wildlife use. The use of unmanned aerial systems or drones have become the newest tool in our toolbox for invasive plant management. Using contractors, these drones can be quickly deployed to hard-to-reach areas or in locations where boat access is limited. The use of drones to manage aquatic weeds falls really well in line with our herbicide reduction strategy, as the application is targeted directly to the nuisance species with the smallest amount of product needed. And let me see here. We've got a video of this drone flying by here. It goes into slow motion, and you can see that the product is slowly dripping out from the bottom of that drone just a few feet over the water, specifically targeting the submerged aquatic vegetation and nowhere else. And this was done at Henderson and Airport pulling canals. There we go. So with all this activity, right, with all the stuff that you've seen before, you wonder about the threatened and endangered species out there, the animal species. Many of the natural communities in Florida are dependent on fire to remain healthy. These natural communities, such as scrub and pine flatwoods, and the many animal species that use them, depend on fire for a continued existence. Gopher tortoises, red cockaded woodpeckers, and scrub jays are just a few examples of the species that rely on fire for their habitat. We work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and FWC on any projects that may impact T&E species. We've trained wildlife biologists at the district that monitor the locations of nested species and avoid them in accordance to specific laws and guidelines. An example of that is when we have a several 100-yard buffer when we're burning to the closest caracara nest, or if we have an earth moving project, our contractors are trained to how to identify eastern indigo snakes, or if we come across a gopher tortoise burrow, those burrows are inspected by our biologists. And if we can't avoid that burrow, then those gopher tortoises are carefully relocated with certified trained staff to our in-house recipient site where those gopher tortoises reside in perpetuity and protected in perpetuity. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the Python program. We all hear about that quite often, and what we hear most about are our Python contractors. So that's just one of the tools in our toolbox. I was saying that we use IPM for plant management. We use IPM for invasive animal management like pythons. So our Python contractors are working around the clock, just like FWC's contractors. They have 50, we have 50, and they work 365 days a year. And it's really the most cost-effective tool that we have. But we recognize that we still need to learn more. So we're doing work with University of Florida, where they're doing systematic monitoring of the entire footprint. They're monitoring and observing the impacts and effects of our program, monitoring for wildlife response, native wildlife response. We're doing radio telemetry similar to what the Conservancy of Southwest Florida has done, tracking males and females to the nest and learning more about their habitat and how they move around the ecosystem. We're doing population studies with the U.S. Geological Survey. And of course, outreach is a huge component of what we do, and we partner with multiple agencies on that. We're working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the University of Florida on attractant studies, how we can lure these pythons into traps instead of having to seek them. And of course, the annual Python Challenge, which will be coming up again this summer, which is a phenomenal international event. It brings in a lot of attention. It's a great opportunity for members of the public to learn about Everglades restoration, learn about invasive species, how they impact this fragile ecosystem, and learn how to catch a python safely. And here are some of the stats related to the contractor program. The other efforts, the 7,600 pythons that have been removed beginning in around 2000, those are like the volunteer programs that were in Everglades National Park. In 2017, that's when we started the program. Actually, March was the anniversary. That's when you saw a huge uptick, when we started contracting and reimbursing many of those volunteers and getting out into the wild to remove these pythons. There was an additional uptick in 2019 and 2020 when Governor DeSantis charged us with doubling our efforts, incorporating more research, and making our program larger than it had been before. And so collectively, we're over 20,000 snakes removed. The district contractors and FWC contractors have removed 13,000 snakes alone just since 2017. So again, I would like to thank our partners. We couldn't do this without the support and coordination of our partners at the Crew Land and Water Trust, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, the Audubon of Florida, and the Florida Forest Service. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Roy, for your excellent presentation. Board members, do you have some questions for Roy? Go ahead, Ms. McLeod.
Just have one. Do we pay those contractors to remove the python, and how much do we pay them?
So thank you. They do get paid by the hour, and it depends where they're hunting. And even when they're not finding the snakes, it's still good information, because when they're going to a location and there's no snakes, that's probably a good thing, you know? So they have a wage within the core area. Then they have a set wage per hour in the outer periphery. And then there's a premium pay for areas where that are not being surveyed enough. They clock in and out using their phones. A really cool program. I think Mike Kirkland gave a presentation to the governing board. He's our Python program manager, about this really novel software that we use to track the contractors' movements, where they find the snakes. They take photos of it. It's all geo-referenced, and it's automatic billing. They leave digital breadcrumbs so we can see where the contractors are, how efficient they're being, evaluate the catch per unit effort, what contractor is doing better than others. So there's a lot of really cool data that I can get from that. When they do find a python, then those snakes are, they get reimbursed by the foot. So the larger the snake, the more money that they're going to be getting.
And have we utilized all the contractors out there that possibly could work on this, or are we limited to the number that we can hire?
Well, there are thousands of people that want to become Python contractors. We keep a database of the ongoing applications, and there's just so many people that want to do it. And really what it comes down to are the people that are most knowledgeable about the land and the ability to see the snakes. They've put in trained biologists out in the field with a Python right next to them, and they can't see them. It's like right there, you know? So, but it's just, you have to really develop that eye. And we get to a point where there's like diminishing returns. We have 50 contractors, FWC has 50 contractors. Each of those contractors can have support team with them, like volunteers and assistants. So there's a lot of people out there day and night, and we have to be mindful of overcrowding the levees, you know. But I think we're at a point where we're probably at a good place with the number of contractors we have with the land that we're covering.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good job.
Okay, Vice Chair Waters.
Hey, thanks, Rory. Two questions. One is on the exotics, Brazilian pepper, melaleuca that we remove. Are we cutting that and mulching? We kill it in place. I can't imagine that amount of land we're hauling it out. How are we doing that? That's the first question.
So we're using herbicides, judiciously using herbicides to go at the Kogan grass and Brazilian pepper. There's different philosophies with how to go after some of the other plant species and hardwoods like sable palm. Should it be mulch? Should it be targeted with herbicide? But what we use predominantly is the use of herbicide. There are biocontrol agents, little bugs that have been paired up over an extensive research period with U.S. Department of Agriculture over in Davie, where they're bringing back that symbiotic relationship. So, you know, Australian pines were, there's a natural predator back in Australia. So what these researchers will do is they'll go to Australia, find that natural bug that kept the population of Australian pines at bay over there, and reintroduce that over a very lengthy biological process and vetting process to make sure that particular bug doesn't go after like another native plant. And only once that is accomplished do they release that and mass rear those agents, they call them, into the wild. So we use that for Brazilian pepper. It's called a Brazilian pepper thrip. But again, going back, herbicide is our most effective tool in our IPM toolbox for managing vegetation.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then switching to the Python, it looked like from 2020, the numbers per year from the contractors has started to drop down. Is that just basically we've, you know, kind of got the cleaned it up a little bit and there are fewer there, do we think? Or are they getting better at hiding, or fewer resources going after it, or do we not know?
I wish I could say for sure. I've been looking into that. Some of that could be environmental anomalies, but it's also a product of different contractors with the different agencies. If I were to pull up the district numbers, our district contract numbers have actually gone up over the last 4 years. So there's a little bit of a balance between what FWC contractors are doing in their performance versus ours. I'm not trying to create two different teams here, but I can tell you that the district contractor numbers have been steadily going up over the last 4 years.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Smith?
Thank you, Dan. That was my question, one of them. Is there a season like for python hunting?
It's really year round, but the most amount of pythons are taken out of the environment during the summertime at night. During the winter times, a lot of the larger bodied pythons come out to bask around 9, 10, 11 o'clock. That's when I used to work in my previous job, I would always go out thinking that's the best time to get them. But in reality, it's July, August timeframe at night when all the hatchlings are coming out and they're moving around and the adults are moving out looking for prey. And that's why we also moved the Python Challenge from January to the summertime.
Okay, note to self, don't walk. I'm sorry. And we had a chance to go individually to look at to tour the Corkscrew Sanctuary. So amazing work there. It was very impressive. And I have people that are interested in working the prescribed burns. So do we do that through Crew and sign up that way, or how do you?
Yeah, that would be your first step, work with Crew, and then we would coordinate with that organization.
Okay, thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Hill?
Hey, Roy, a question in regard to Picayune Strand. As we it seems like the visitor experiencing crew in other areas that we have responsibility over are excellent. PICU Strand seems like it's, what's the strategy for improving the visitor experience before somebody does something crazy, like trying to put an airport there?
Well, that certainly won't happen. But as far as, yes, you're right, that the visitor experience is much different at Crew. It's smaller than Picayune. Picayune is a much larger area to cover. But yeah, we would definitely look into how we can make that more enjoyable and have these informational areas that people can go to and learn about all the restoration that's going on.
So does that do we need like a public-private partnership of some nonprofit organization possibly getting involved to give you a little nudge? Because it doesn't seem like there's a lot of momentum with that.
I think you just gave me the nudge.
Mr. Romano? Yeah, your mic, got to be on the microphone, Mike.
How long before you have to go back and retreat?
Excuse me, Mr. Romano, get closer to your mic, please, so you can be heard.
Wondering how long before you had to go back and retreat the area?
Usually it's on a cycle of every year or so. I don't know if you have a lot of experience, Ryan, with treating Brazilian pepper, and how often is the retreatment for pepper in this neck of the woods?
You can't answer from the.
Yeah,
the
so
seat. You need to
I'll
be on a microphone, please, or
come right on up.
tell Rory.
Brazilian pepper might be on a 2 to 3 year cycle. If it's being treated with other species, those might be on a different cycle. And if those are shorter, then we may treat Brazilian pepper when we're going back to treat those others on a shorter cycle.
Thank you.
Really, it's remember trying to get back down to maintenance control where we don't have to be out there so often. So if we get out there to a point where, you know, we're almost hand pulling Melaleucas out of the ground, that's what you can consider maintenance control.
I have a couple of questions for you. Could you explain the burn cycle process? I mean, we talk about burning and not burning, but talk about the process of when you decide that there is a need to burn a certain amount of acres, how you go through that process to get to the actual lighting of the match for the fire.
Right. So we're trying to restore that ecological function that was kind of suppressed over the years for many decades in this country, at least. You know, burning was kind of suppressed. And so what we're doing is we're restoring that ecological function. And Florida is the lightning capital of the country. So we go and we identify areas based on, you know, the habitat type. What type of burn would naturally be recurring in that if we were not suppressing that? So we look at the soil moisture, we look at the humidity, we look at the wind, we look at all the different plant communities. We're cognizant of the trees that are in the area. We don't want to scorch old pine trees, right? So we work and we were able to do slower moving burns, so we're not overheating the area. We're, like I said, we're incorporating a lot of different climatological factors when we're putting these burn prescriptions together. And it's not just to restore that ecological tool that Mother Nature had out there, is to provide those benefits to the wildlife, right? So when we're burning, we're also burning to benefit the wildlife. A lot of these fruit and flower species come back after you burn within a few days. I mean, you go out to a burn within a week or two after we burn, you can start seeing all this really nice fresh growth that comes back. So we're incorporating a lot of those different things as we're burning. It can take weeks to plan this burn out, but ultimately it's that phone call and that email to the Forest Service that we are burning this morning based off of today's weather conditions, and they will give us the yes or no.
And then once you burn, that's for a day?
Yes. So it usually fires up around 9-10 o'clock. And then it's a very quick process. It can last 2-3 hours, and then we're monitoring the burn until it's out. So today's burn, for example, is about 78 acres in Crew. We have people out there right now. If we got the authorization from forestry, they're out there with drip torches and their trucks and their off-road vehicles, and they're hand igniting these burns in a very specific fashion, you know, back burn and flanking burns. They're not doing these circle burns and where it just creates this extremely hot environment. And they're out there with contingencies and communication plans with the adjacent property owners. And they'll walk off the site completely confident, knowing that that burn is not going to impact anything outside of that burn unit.
So once the burn is completed and it's being monitored to make sure that it's out and it's safe, then what happens post-burn?
Well, it's a very good question. So it's not just set it and forget it, right? And so you go back and you monitor the lessons learned. Did we get as much, you know, we planned to do 78 acres today. How many acres did we actually do? Did we do 20? Did we do 75? Hopefully no more than 78 because that was the plan, right? And then get on to that interval of we did it on this day. When are we going to come back again? How is that burn going to adjoin the next unit? So those are the things that we evaluate after the burn. And like Ryan was saying, get into that healthy return interval of where we are, you know, maximizing the benefit for the ecology.
Okay, I have another question for you. That was a good explanation. On your slide 5, when you were talking about the Picayune Strand Restoration Project vegetation management, and I've been out with your team and I've walked the ground with them and looked at what they've been doing, and I know what a huge task it is to manage that project area. In looking at that slide 5, I'm trying to understand here completion to date, that time frame, and then just for fiscal year 2024, you're looking to do 5,000 more acres, but it seems like the completion to date is a little low.
Right.
You're increasing that planning horizon to do more in fiscal year 2024. I'm trying to understand better the relationship with what you're trying to tell me there with those numbers.
So the plan for the fiscal year 24 was based off of our budget, right? And how many acres we can cover off of that set budget. And the numbers to the left of what we've covered in the last 2 quarters, last 6 months. So we'd like to do most of this work during the dry season, right? But because of the higher water levels, we're most likely not going to reach that 1-year target of 5,000 acres for the construction footprint and 9,500 acres for the non-construction footprint. But these plans are made before the beginning of fiscal year 24 based on the budget that we anticipate getting and the acreage that we will be able to cover with that budget.
Okay, so you did clarify one thing. The area distance covered so far was in the past 6 months,
Correct.
not since the beginning of the Picayune Strand.
No, not that could be a whole nother presentation, but this would be 2,200 acres the past 6 months.
Okay, so that's helpful. So in looking at the overall 55,000 acres of the Picayune Strand, can you explain for the board how you go about identifying areas and then after you've treated the areas, put them into management and what you're trying to accomplish by that? So I think that would be helpful.
So even when the conditions are too wet to apply the herbicide, we're out there monitoring. We're monitoring the areas that may have been treated 2 years prior and that we can't get to this year. We're monitoring the areas that we treated this year and then how we're going to be going into that return frequency the next couple of years. But the progress to date, I would have to come back to the board at another time that shows how much we've actually covered over the last 7 years or so. It's pretty significant. We've had very good funding over the years, but it's a lot of monitoring. It's a lot of going out there by helicopter, by ATV, and just seeing how our herbicide efforts have been, the environment's been responding to our herbicide efforts.
Can you talk about the difference between treatment and management? You know, you could run out there and treat all 55,000 acres, but it'd be questionable whether or not you could manage that. Can you explain that for the board, what the difference is?
Well, management is just, not all 55,000 acres may need to be managed, right? So we're doing these systematic reconnaissance aerial flights, also by foot, and then we're identifying those areas that need to be treated. So when we sweep an area, we're not necessarily treating everywhere that we're sweeping. So you may hear other statistics at the South Florida Water Management District board meetings where we're talking about areas swept within Water Conservation Area 3. That doesn't mean that we've treated all of Water Conservation Area 3. That's that we're managing the entire area and we're treating a subset of that managed area.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Are there any are there any questions or public comment?
I have no slips and no hands raised at this time.
Okay, great. So shall we move to Mr. Brown's presentation?
There you go.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Ryan Brown. I'm a vegetation management specialist with the Land Resources Bureau of the South Florida Water Management District. Today, I'll be giving you an overview of the tree management program that we have here at the Big Cypress Basin. So here in Collier County, things are pretty flat. We have a lot of canals in order to move the water off the land when we need to. We have, in fact, 139 miles of canals and 38 water control structures. Like Rory was saying, with invasive exotics, you can't just build something and forget it. So these systems have to be maintained constantly, and they're maintained for the acceptance of stormwater any time of the year. One maintenance aspect that we have is hazardous tree removal. And the reason that we do that is because these hazardous trees can cause blockages of canals, structures, and they can also increase the risk of destructive flooding. So I said a word here, hazardous trees, that you may or may not be familiar with, but I just want to go into a little bit of detail with that. Why are trees hazardous to our system? And so let's take a look at some pictures here. This is after Hurricane Irma, Golden Gate Canal. In that picture on the left there, you can see there's a lot of trees down. There's only a couple of spots there on the right that you can see the canal bank. And then on the picture on the right, that's after we've done some removal, and it just shows you, how much volume was actually in that water. Here's some more pictures after Hurricane Irma. On the left there, that's FACA Union 5 structure. You can see that there's a lot of vegetation caught up in that flowway there. I'm not an expert on water management, but I can assure you that there's less flow going through than there would be if there was no vegetation. The picture on the right there is FACA Union 4 structure. There's some household debris there, which could also cause some flow problems. This is something that we can't necessarily proactively address, but it is something that we need to be able to address right away after a storm in an emergency situation so we can keep our water flowing. Here's some more pictures of some flooding after Hurricane Irma, and I just want to provide some context here. This flooding is not caused by trees in our canals. This is all caused by rain that's been put on the land. However, it's our systems that are charged with removing that water from the land. So if we have trees in our canals or hung up in our structures, it's going to take us longer to move that water off the land. Here's some more flooding pictures after Hurricane Irma. Golden Gate 4 there on the left, you can see is actually completely submerged with water. On the right there's a residential neighborhood. All the houses seem to be okay, but their streets are underwater. So until we move that water out of there, they're all going to be stuck in their houses. And so we've talked about why are trees hazardous, but what is a hazardous tree? Well, it's pretty simple. It's any tree that can fall into our canal, into a structure, or block our right of way that we need to access a structure. And I've just got a video here to illustrate some of that. So this is a large ficus tree that was on Golden Gate Canal during Hurricane Ian, and it fell into the canal. It's not very dramatic. We don't have tornadoes here picking trees up and throwing them far away. It's just if it's close enough to topple over and fall into the canal, then that's what we consider a hazardous tree. And you can see that tree is quite large. So if half of that tree canopy is in the water, it can be slowing down quite a bit of water. And so what do we do to address these hazards? Well, we have a tree management program, and this program is it's designed to reduce those hazardous trees on our right of ways. We target the greatest areas of threat to conveyance. Unfortunately, we don't have enough money to go over all 139 miles of all these hazardous trees, but we do pinpoint the areas with the most potential hazard. So in these tree management programs, what do we actually remove? Well, we're removing all trees and palms within our right of way or easement. And sometimes if there's our easement or right of ways are not always very big. Sometimes they're at top of banks, sometimes they're only 5 feet past, and trees can certainly fall past that. So sometimes if we see a tree that's past our right of way and we deem it to be hazardous, we can try to go ahead and take that, but certainly only with owner permission. Another thing that we target is ficus hedges. Like you saw in that last video, ficus topple over very easy in a storm. They have shallow root systems. So even if it's a hedge, we don't allow those in our right of ways. Conversely, we do have some flexibility in our right of ways here in BCB. There's a lot of right of ways and easements that we don't have a path to drive a truck down. We don't have any need to get to a structure there. And so in those instances, there are some plantings allowed, low hedges kept below 6 feet, or any kind of beautification, shrubs, ground covers are allowed. So I've talked about this tree removal program, but how does this actually work? So we implement this process starting with identifying a project, and that's done very systematically. Like I said, 139 miles of canals. There's a lot of trees out there, so we have to kind of go about this methodically. And the way that that's done is every section of canal is essentially rated for its risk. And you can see those priority numbers here. Priority number 1 would be the highest priority, and those would be direct impacts to canal conveyance or right-of-way issues if those trees fell. And so those are the ones we usually talk about doing it at the beginning of every year, the ones that are going to affect our system the most. However, we go all the way down to priority 5, where there's essentially no trees in that right-of-way, and all we need to do there is mow it to maintain it. So once a project is identified for the year, we go through all these additional steps to ensure that the project runs smoothly. This is a basin-specific checklist, so we do things a little differently here than we do in the rest of the district. These steps here are mainly to make sure we're doing our due diligence, making sure that we do still in fact own that land, that our line is in the right place, that we're taking the trees that are in fact ours. And there's also a big public outreach component to this. We want to make sure that people know what's happening. We want to get their their input. If they want to let us take a tree that we deem to be hazardous that's on their land, that's when that's done. They're notified all the way up to the project completion through project websites. So we prefer to do all of our tree removal at time of peace. However, emergencies do happen, big storms do happen. And in these instances, our staff is trained to respond. So are our contractors. We do very similar stuff, all year round. So this is, it's pretty straightforward to us to respond to these instances, but we are here when those happen. And I just wanted to go through some projects. So these are some things that we accomplished last year in the BCB. We did a tree removal project on the Miller Canal. So this is in Picayune Strand, north of our Miller pump station. And as you can imagine, we would not want trees falling into that canal and getting hung up into our, I'm sure it's a multi-million-dollar structure there. So we did some tree removal along the edge of that canal there. It was a win-win for us because it's a safety issue for forestry. Having to fight wildfires right up next to a canal with trees, and they may not be able to see where that canal is. So it was a win-win for everyone. Sometimes in tree management, we get to do some projects that are not necessarily flood control related. This was a project down on the Facka Union Canal south of US 41. There's a feature there called the manatee oxbows. And this is a feature where manatees go in there to weather the cold water. And we have researchers that will make counts of these manatees to monitor their population and their health. And they were having trouble seeing through some vegetation. On that left there, you can see the feature, and there's a small rim of vegetation. Those trees were actually pretty tall, and you couldn't see through them. That was not an intended design feature. So we did end up removing that vegetation there, and I think the plan is to put some riprap so that it does not grow back. For this year in 2024, we have a project planned on Henderson Creek, and this is going to be from winding Cypress Boulevard south to US 41. This is the canal that's directly adjacent to Collier Boulevard or 951. And we're going to be doing some tree removals behind some homes and behind the water treatment facility there. Here's some pictures of the canal as it currently is. You can see that there are some trees growing out of the slope, growing at top of slope, and certainly on our right of way. So those are going to be the trees that we're targeting. And that's about all I have. Do you all have any questions for me?
Thank you, Ryan, for your presentation. Are there any questions for him? Mr. Hill?
Ryan, after the trees are removed, the problem trees are removed, which do you like to see replace where the trees were?
So it depends on where we are. In some places we really don't have a drivable right of way. So sometimes we can get a mower in there. So either grass can be replaced or whatever kind of weeds grow in can be managed with a mower.
Okay.
Sometimes it has to be maintained with herbicide if it's in an area that no mowing can go. And sometimes we're lucky it's a backyard, so it's already mowed, it's already maintained. We're just taking the trees that have volunteered in those areas.
Okay.
Any other questions? Are there any members of the public who wanted to ask any questions?
Not at this time.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. All right, our next item on the agenda is adapting to future rainfall projections in South Florida, and we have Dr. Carolina Moran with us today.
Good morning, Chairwoman, and good morning, all our board members here. Happy to be here again in the BCB to talk about this effort that we have been developing for a few years now in South Florida Water Management District, which is really helping us navigate on what should be the rainfall projections that we anticipate to occur in future scenarios and how we use that for planning in infrastructure investments. So when we talk about rainfall and the need for us to identify future rainfall, I think we need to think about the system we have, how we move water. So just introducing you to this big picture here. I know you're very familiar with that, but we do have a major BCB system here, miles of canals, 3 pump stations, water control structures, and also focusing on those main 4 coastal structures there, FE1, HDC1, and GG1, and COCO1. And again, when we talk about the rainfall, we are really talking a lot on flood protection and flood protection responsibility. We are the main first question we want to be able to answer as we look at future rainfall is, are we increasing the flood risks? So just a big picture here on how flood protection is a shared responsibility between us as Water Management District, but also in the BCB, but and also the county, Collier County as the main operator and maintaining the secondary system, and then homeowner associations and private landowners on the tertiary system is really an art. It has to be done through a coordinated effort. And the first thing for us to recognize too is those conditions are changing, right? We are looking at these flood risks, flood vulnerabilities. We also need to understand that in addition to rainfall, different patterns that we are observing, there is significant land development happening in the region, especially if we consider this system was designed early on, 50, 70 years ago, with a very different setting, a very different landscape, and not as dense urban environments that we have today. So population increase. So as the project was growing, we see population increase. Initial population on the time of design was 2 million. We are now near 9 million, above 9 million, and projecting to be 11.45 million by 2045. And yeah, and we can see here just an illustration of 1940s setting when this whole project started to be conceptualized and what we have today, 2022. So significant change in land use, that is also a major contribution to flood risks and flood vulnerability. Moving to how we are tracking those evolving conditions also from a climate perspective. So in addition to the changing conditions on the landscape and setting and population growth, we also are seeing changes in climate water patterns in general in the region. We do have a dedicated effort. It's our water and climate resilience metrics effort. We focus on data that the district has. There is a lot of organizations that do monitoring that also look at trends and evolving conditions. In this effort, we are seeking to complement those analyses, mostly done at the federal level, using the data that we monitor in these agencies. So we basically do advanced data analysis to all the monitoring data that we have to detect trends in those evolving conditions to then inform planning efforts and again, infrastructure investments that might be needed. So here's just a quick glance of some of the data that we already have there. We have rainfall, regional rainfall. So again, looking at observed data and trends that we have been detecting. So rainfall, evapotranspiration trends, tidal elevations, so sea levels. And we have saltwater intrusion, so we are monitoring saltwater intrusion. We have salinity in the Everglades. We are also monitoring estuary migration. So there is, we have been mapping migration of natural areas inland as a result of sea level rise too, and soil subsidence. We are bringing water quality data next. This is the next one, the final progress that we have, the final milestones that we have for this metric on its phase 1. So we don't see water quality there yet, but we are also trying to look at trends from the water quality side. Because this presentation is on rainfall, here what I have the plot of what we were able to detect in terms of a trend for the Southwest Florida region. So if you navigate on the hub, you're going to get to this plot here. Basically, what you have is this blue line trending up is showing that there is a trend, and the test is done with the orange and yellow line just to kind of look on confidence intervals that we have from a statistical perspective. So it's just an approach to detect a significant trend. And in this case here in Southwest Florida, yes, there is a significant trend that was detected according to this statistical test. So it's during the wet season, there is an observed increase in rainfall, total rainfall during the wet season. So this is what we have here. And yes, in addition to what we were able to observe in terms of data, you might be very familiar with those pictures of recent flooding events that occur mainly through those major tropical storm events. So back in 2017, we had Hurricane Irma with significant flooding, overbank flooding, other localized flooding that occurred throughout the basin. Here we see Golden Gate Canal and also Golden Gate City street flooding there. So again, vulnerabilities that we are trying to detect from our system and plan for improvements that we need to implement in the region. Those other pictures came from Hurricane Ian. Even though the majority of the rain from Ian did not fall here in this area, in the PCB area, we still saw some impacts here. This is Naples in some specific locations, Carl on the waters. We don't necessarily think this is a result of the canal itself because we have not seen overbanking of the canal, canal bank exceedancy during the Ian event. But anyway, we have been monitoring all of that. So what you see here is the canal bank during Ian in one of the peaks that was observed during the event. I mentioned that the rainfall did not occur significantly in the BCB area during Ian. This is just a map showing the areas where rainfall was more intense. In dark red, you have a rainfall that we were able to measure as above the 200-year rainfall, meaning that this rainfall has a chance of occurrence of really less than 0.05%, 0.5%. So it's a rare event coming from a tropical storm. And you can see that it concentrated a little bit north there through Sarasota, Hardy, and impacted significantly all the upper Kissimmee River Basin too. So the system, of course, is not designed and will not be designed to handle such a rare event, a 200-year rainfall. But we have been tracking this too and trying to understand the potential impacts of all of that and how we can better respond and plan for enhancements. So when we think about all those observed events and we want to think about how we want to project, it's not necessarily just extrapolating what we have been observing. What we have been finding out as we discuss those topics with experts, scientists in this field is that we have to consider a lot of very complex processes, especially in Florida. The rainfall occurrences is a little bit more complex. We have a very long land-ocean interaction. We have convective events that are very specific, localized to Florida. So we don't capture all of that when we look at tools that are available out there, like global climate models. But we have been investigating all of that. We're trying to just have the best science to support how do we see this happening into the future? How can we really project to the future and understand potential processes that might occur as the whole climate conditions are changing? So we partner with the USGS and Florida International University to develop this study. We have been working for a few years now. So we used the best available global climate models, downscaling data sets. Those are just data sets from very large resolution models that were downsized to a more refined scale. Still not able to capture everything that occurs in Florida, but giving us a chance to look a little bit further on that. So by looking at those global models, what we did is we developed a concept that we call change factors. It's basically a multiplier. So when we do flood vulnerability planning and we try to assess performance of the system, what we do is we look at how the system perform on a 1 in 10 event, a 1 in 20 event, 20% chance, 10% chance, 5% chance, 1% chance. And we have numbers that we use to do these assessments. And then what we do with just change factors, just multiply. So what the current conditions numbers are, let's assume we have an 8-inch event for this specific region for a 1% chance event. What we do, we multiply it by the number that this study is giving us. Usually, I would say it's 20% for the more rare events. So yeah, we use all the science here. There is a link to the publication that was done. Here is a picture of the initial very first workshop that we established back in 2019 to discuss this. So just to reinforce that there has been a lot of efforts to be able to understand what we have available to support this decision and what kind of progress we can do. I want to report that what we have now is part of what we call short-term strategy, only looking at available global models that are more, I would say, high resolution, not as refined as we need. But we also have a long-term strategy that we began about a year ago, which really develops a regional climate model for Florida. We will reduce uncertainties a lot when we go on this path of just having a more refined model for our state. And we are working in collaboration with the whole state for that. This is just a big picture, some copies of our report that we produced after the USGS produced the results to us. So we went inside the district, our team internally discussed how we would make those, how we would adopt those change factors as part of our planning processes. This is mostly used for the level of service program. So when we run those future conditions, when we run this modeling, I'm going to touch a little bit about the level of service next, but the basic summary of this is when we run those models, how we want to incorporate that, how those scenarios need to occur into the future, based on a series of considerations that USGS presented to us when they published their report. I mentioned to you 20% for the larger events. We do have all this data summarized in a portal. You basically click in your area, you select the event that you might want to look at, and in this case is a 5%, it's a 1 in 5 year event. So it's saying that the median 1.12 there, I have it copy in the big, I have increased here, zoom in on the right. So the median value, which is the percentile 50%, is just saying in average, we are going to be seeing 12% increase for the 5-year event. So we have that for all the recurrency, and we use those numbers for all the scenarios that we are building as we run those models. To have a picture here of how those numbers are changing for the Southwest area. So we use the rainfall region there, the rainfall area, which is called the Southwest Coast. You can see the dark polygon there, dark blue polygon on the left. So for this entire area, the numbers that we average to this approach that we did in the district vary from 12% for the 5-year, as I mentioned, all the way to 32% for a 200-year, a less than 1% chance event. So yeah, so we basically have one multiplier for each of those occurrences, and we have just plotted there like what the statistics use in terms of uncertainty. It's important to just emphasize this because we are on the first phase and still we have uncertainty, and we are trying to understand how we can best incorporate that as part of these studies. I mentioned working with the state. So this entire first phase, so as we determine those change factors for South Florida, we partner with the state. There is a new organization that was established by Senate Bill 1954. It's called the Florida Flood Hub for Applied Research and Innovation. It's based on the USF in the College of Marine Science here in St. Petersburg. So the team is now in charge of defining those conditions, like any flood vulnerability and scenarios and models, and how we need to look at that for the entire state. So we partner with them. They basically adopted this initial effort that we did at South Florida to the entire state. So we have a publication already out there that is this USGS publication using the same approach that we use for South Florida to the entire state. And they are now working on the report like we did on how you best adopt those, providing some guidelines so that the local governments can also use consistent approach when they are assessing those flood risks. So this is just a link to the report that was out from the USGS, and good to know that, I mean, we have the whole state working and somehow a big collaboration. I mentioned how we apply those change factors. Just to reinforce to you here, we have our flood protection level of service program. The program is basically running models, advanced hydrologic models, to assess those future conditions. So we do basin by basin. We have been doing that for 10 years. We developed the BCB study back in 2018. So again, looking at the infrastructure that we have today, conditions that we have today, conditions in the future, and how we need to enhance the system. That's the main purpose of the level of service program. In parallel to that, we have initiated a study with the Army Corps. It's focusing on the lowest coast at this point, but will be expanded to the entire system next. It's the same, very similar approach to the level of service, just being reproduced by the Army Corps now under all the guidelines from the Army Corps. And then we also have our resiliency plan that basically we combine all the recommendations coming from the level of service studies, other input that we have to understand those, what do we need to invest? So what are the projects, what are the infrastructure needs that we have to be able, that we need to implement in the agency as we see those conditions evolving? So we do have a series of adaptation strategies that are being identified. So as we map vulnerabilities, we are focusing on also understanding what can we do? What are the investments? What are the infrastructure adjustments that we need? And we have it all summarized in the flood resiliency plan. We update it every year. As you can imagine, we don't have all the answers. We are developing those studies, and we are updating the plan with the results every year. I mentioned about the level of service, just to reinforce here quickly, considers rainfall, considers tide, storm surge, and sea level rise. So look at all possible flood drivers. Rainfall is one of that. We will be, of course, building scenarios of future rainfall with this increased number now that is given through the change factors. I also mentioned the FPLOS study in the BCB, so I have a link here. If you want to access, it was completed in 2018. And we have all the final reports and appendices here. I did a presentation to the board about a year ago on the main results of the level of service. Going back to our collaboration with the state, beyond the Florida Flood Hub, they have a whole structural program. It's the Florida Resilient Florida program. It's hosted, it's sitting at FDEP. They manage this entire program. So in addition to the Florida Flood Hub helping to determine those future scenarios, guidelines to those assessments, they have an entire team working with the local governments, giving grants, giving support for the local governments to develop those assessments, and not only that, to implement those projects. There is over $1 billion already awarded for the past 3 years of the program implementation to local governments, municipalities, counties, some of our projects too at Water Management District through the Resilient Florida program. There is significant funding there. Every year they have an open period for the application. We work very closely with DEP and also in collaboration with the local governments to identify those joint strategies for us to be able to reduce flood risks in our region. Our plan, I touched you a little bit on what we do in on our sea level rise and flood resiliency plan, just some of the big visions that we have for the plan here, just reducing the risk, as I mentioned, focusing on implementation resources that we have, addressing not only current conditions, but also future. We don't want to plan for infrastructure that we know might be underperforming in 10, 20 years. So we want to be able to look at that and how we can adapt the infrastructure to grow. We do very closely with the public engagement, understanding what we have, what the counties might need. The system is an integrated system. When we look at infrastructure investments at the regional system, we need to also look on what the local governments are planning. We work very closely with of course, any ecosystem restoration efforts that are happening in the region, so we can leverage what's being done through ecosystem restoration and also enhance outputs from those projects from a flood resiliency perspective. Reinforcing SERP. As we build those resiliency from a flood perspective, I focus a lot of those questions here. We understand that the work that we are doing already in SERP is already helping in building significant resiliency in the system. As we see those changing patterns, there is a significant number of storage projects, for instance, that are being advanced through SERP that already provide resiliency that will help us to deal with those changing patterns into the future. And I just think it's important to mention that here too, because the SERP goals are really aligned to the goal of building resiliency. And a lot of what's being done from a SERP perspective is already helping us to manage those future changes in patterns into the future. I'm going to just finish here with one project, one example of a project that is being implemented in the BCB Basin. This project is funded through the Resilient Florida program from DEP. We got funding for that last year. This project is what we call a short fix. So as we advance those more expensive and bigger infrastructure investments in coastal structures as they need, we also can harden the existing structures by flood-proofing some of the equipments, some of the mechanical electrical components, by adding in some locations, we can add a plate to the gate that allows us to, again, handle a little bit higher water elevations, water peaks in the canals. So those are really small fixes that helps us on operating the system the way it is today before we have to really make those large investments. So significant progress being made here. We got this funding, as I mentioned, last year. We finished the design for most of the components. There is one more component that we are working on the design, and we are going to be implementing these projects between now and 2026. For here, in the BCB area, what we have is backup controller and other automation features for the Cocoa 1, 2, 3, GG 1, 2, 3, and in the Henderson Creek 1. So those are the projects that are here on BCB that are included in this whole project here. And I mentioned this in the presentation, and I'll just finish reinforcing that. As we plan for those flood adaptation strategies, as we look at what we need to do in our system, we have to be working very closely with municipalities, the county, universities, the partners at the federal level too, Army Corps listed here, to really understand how those multiple components will be functioning and really helping to reduce those risks together. We cannot solve this issue alone. It's not just our system that needs to be improved. We are looking at how we need to improve our system and also how those three-tier systems need to be working together and what are the strategies that we have there to deal with, sea level rise, increasing rainfall, and those challenges into the future. Next steps, we will be incorporating those change factors as part of flood vulnerability planning in general, including an update of the FPLOS assessment for the BCB Basin in the next cycle. So between 2-3 years, we're going to be coming back. This is the program, the level of service program is set up in a way that you go do an assessment and revisit every 8 to 10 years. So we'll be doing that here, and we'll be able to run an updated scenarios here, accounting for these change factors in rainfall, and also ensuring that the design and building of the infrastructure that we are doing today and we continue to do is resilient and will increase the entire community resiliency here. Here's just some links on our how to get involved and receive updates on what we are doing from the resilience perspective. So here, specific subscription in case you want to get updates. And with that, I'll open up for questions. Thank you very much, Ms. Roman.
Thank you, Carolina. Excellent presentation. We'll go to any board questions or comments for Carolina. Ms. McLeod?
Okay, so my head is spinning. There's so much information there. So just to get an understanding of this, so you're doing all this modeling so that you can make recommendations to increase our resiliency. And what we're planning for, because you had a slide that showed heavy rainfall that occurred, I think, during Irma. And I think you mentioned that it was a 200-year rainfall. I've never heard that so far. So we experienced 200-year rainfall in Hurricane Irma.
Yes.
Okay.
So we have been seeing, like during Hurricane Irma, we were able to detect this event that is a rare event above normal. So we call it a less than 1% chance of occurrence. But our system is just not designed to handle that volume of water. And I think we need to be always aware of that. We'll do our best to be able to handle those excess stormwater volumes. But when you are dealing with a major event like that, there are other strategies, emergency, management strategies that we need to apply to, because it's very expensive to build a system that could handle, it's almost infeasible to build a system that could handle such a rare event.
And can our system, after all of the adapted new practices that you come up with, will it be able to handle like a 100-year storm? And then was Ian a 100-year storm?
So it varies spatial. So as you can see, the dark red is the areas that we were above the 100-year, more the 200-year. If we go and you see like the blue, for instance, they are more like a normal event, 5% chance of occurrence. Our system, the best number we use to say how much volume our system can handle is 1 in 25 years. So it's a 4% event, 4% chance event. So that's how we design our system to operate. That's how it's the best number we can use as a reference. It's not necessarily this number everywhere, but it's the best number we can use today to understand what kind of typical rainfall we are going to be able to handle without causing any impacts to the system. The houses, there is another regulation beyond us. The minimum floor elevation of houses are usually designed to be above the 1 in 100. That's a FEMA regulation. the counties adopt. So it's part of land use code, and they should be, it should be designed above. So you might have, like, I mean, our system might have limitations if we have a 1 in 100 event, but we should not be getting to, I mean, if the houses are on above this 100-year level, we should be not be seeing flooding in properties.
Mhm. And I know that there are certain municipalities that are talking right now about sustainability and resiliency, the city of Naples, Everglades City, I'm not quite sure, perhaps Marco Island as well. And you had mentioned grant monies to help with these kinds of things. How, is there something that we can give to our contacts at these municipalities to inform them of this, about the grant monies available to them? Because they're all like talking about this right now.
Yes, definitely. So, number one, the grant money from DEP, the largest program we have in the state, Resilient Florida, they have workshops. They started about 2-3 weeks ago. They do workshops to help every applicant to what are the steps for the application, how they can, like, I mean, what kind of data they need. And I strongly recommend attending those workshops. They have even some office hours that they reserve if you have specific questions. The team in DEP is doing an amazing job in really getting the program out there, the opportunity out there, and the requirements out there. So for you to apply, one of the asks they have, it's not a formal requirement yet, but will become soon, is to have a vulnerability assessment completed. They also give funding for the municipalities to complete this vulnerability assessments. This is where we can help too, because we have been running those models, and we have those tools. We have support to scenario formulation in the region. We have data that would help them to define what they want to see in terms of future scenarios. We have models that we built that maybe can be leveraged, in knowledge as a whole. So what our modeling team is offer technical review, sit down as part of steering committee teams that those cities are putting together to do those vulnerability assessments. So we do that as an agency. Support from the technical side, make all data and tools available for them if they can use, and again, provide review along the way.
Can I get that information from you, that information for these workshops?
Yes, I'll make sure that I forward an email.
And then the last question I have, are we working with the Army Corps of Engineer on their study that they're doing now for resiliency along the coast? Because you know how they were trying to go down that road before with a project that did not go over very well with the residents along the coastland. You know, some were like these hard concrete walls that they were planning on putting in for resiliency, and that was what was unpopular, but now they're coming up with this new plan. So are we working with them?
So yes, we are working very closely with the Corps on the back-based studies. So there is a back-based study being advanced in the East Coast in Miami-Dade, and there is one being advanced in the West Coast here in Collier County. So the local sponsor is Collier County. So the main partner with the Corps is the county. But we are part of just the technical committee, like we sit in those meetings.
Okay.
And we just provide review comments along the way. So yes, those studies are being advanced. They are facing some challenges in terms of what can be done, what structures we can do. The Corps has a process that they split some of the strategies in the structural, more like what you're just describing, the harder engineering features. Non-structural, which is perhaps elevating houses, which is part of the solution, hardening, somewhat like flood-proofing some of the critical facilities, and also nature-based features, which is being also extensively preferred by a lot of the residents in this area, also in the Miami-Dade area. So yes, we sit down, we discuss, we review the modeling assumptions, we work with them, but we are not the local sponsor for those studies. So we are one of the agencies that can provide comments.
Okay, great. Great to know that you're at the table, and thank you so much for all of this important work.
No, good, thank you. Pleasure to respond to your questions, Ms. McLeod.
Before we go on to the board comment, I just wanted to comment on what you had asked, Michelle, because when the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is involved, you know, by their very name, they are the Corps of Engineers. So they are going to build, and they are going to harden. okay, just by their nature and what they're good at. So what Carolina highlighted on that one slide is all the other aspects of how to plan for this. And I think that green infrastructure is an important one that I think is more approachable by many of the residents, and then elevation of our houses. But the difficulty we have is so many of our houses are built along the way, right? Some of them have been built in the 60s and the 70s, and we didn't have this on our planning horizon. So that's becomes the challenge. PJ, you're next.
Thank you. Amazing work. Actually, Michelle took like 6 of my questions, but I just, how often do you do your resiliency plan? Is that an annual?
Yes, we are
report?
updating annually, mostly because, as I said, it's not comprehensive yet. We have a lot of studies being completed. We, at some point, we might have more longer recurrent period for updating, but we are updating every year for the 4th year now.
Okay. So a vulnerability assessment is something that you can do for a county, you can do it for a city, you can do it for whatever. Do we have one for Collier County, or is this kind of all encompassing of what you do?
So the study that we did at the flood protection level of service is a vulnerability assessment, is a very robust, a very technical flood vulnerability assessment done at the entire BCB basin. So yes, we have this, and I know the local governments are also advancing additional vulnerability assessments through the Resilient Florida program, looking at some additional aspects of vulnerabilities that they may have in general. They focus a lot too on identifying critical infrastructure that is vulnerable to flooding as they do those assessments, which they are responsible to harden, elevate, and flood-proof those threats.
As a real estate broker, one of the first questions I get asked is, and it's similar to what Michelle was asking, but what is the chance of Ian, not Irma, happening again?
That's a hard question, not easy to respond. So in terms of change in recurrence of those hurricane events, the science is very young still. There are some publications out there that are saying we see different patterns in hurricanes, but we are very conservative in terms of how we can really start looking at that in terms of planning our future scenario. We don't do any of that. We just account for the recurrence of the observed events as we plan. If we have the consideration of any of those tropical storms, we just look at what we observe and the frequency of those observations. So there is significant research being done and being advanced. I'm assuming in recent years, we'll have a little bit more solid science to say, are we seeing an increase in the number or magnitude of those storms? And the chance of having, to answer a question, what is the chance of having an event like that? I would have to just look, if you want a very scientific numerical engineering question, I have to look at some of the models that we have out there, because they are given a formal recurrence frequency, and especially the levels. When we see the water levels, we can say like a surge of 14 feet has a chance of occurrence of 1% or something like that. And we can look at those numbers, but I mean, it's not one simple number, and it's not everywhere. It changes by each locality.
I'm going to have to think about how I'm going to answer that then. Okay.
Yes.
That's really, really interesting. And the building code and resiliency hardening, and that's kind of the world I live in too. So it's good information. I love your page 22. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much, Mrs. Mead.
Okay. Mr. Hill?
I guess I have a lot of homework to do to get on the website and review your area of resiliency before I ask any in-depth questions, but I got a couple short ones. You reference a number of studies, salinity, and I think sea level rise in the slide deck. Do you have any data points in the basin's area of responsibility that were included in those studies?
Yes. So all the data points that we have observed is combined in this portal here, which is our water and climate metrics portal.
Right.
So most of the data points from an observation perspective is available here and
Okay.
also in the DB Hydro, our overall data management tool that we have to make data accessible to every local government. Is this specifically your question where we can find the data?
Yeah, I'm just wondering what the locations were, which we can deal with off another time.
Yes.
But I just wanted to make sure the basin's represented in the data's collection.
Yes, and the Basin is, I can say yes. And if you, the nice functionality that I have in this portal is the first thing you see is a map and the points where you have data. So you can go on one by one and verify what kind of points and what kind of
Okay.
data you have there inside the Basin.
And then I'm concerned with the amount of development that we see here in Collier County versus the ability is every home that's built on what was virgin territory, that we lose the ability to store water. And I'm sure that comes into your models that are quite interesting. As to the ability to store water, is the more building we have and more development, less ability for nature to store water. And that, I guess, increases our responsibility to deal with the flooding issue incrementally. And I'm sure you have models that project that.
Yes, that's exactly what we do in those level of service models. So we look at what will be the future land use. So we speak to the planning councils, planning committees in agencies in each county, municipality, to try to have the best representation of those developments. So we always do around 50-year scenario. So let's assume we are looking at 2070. We walk with the city officials, county officials to help us map what kind of development might occur. And those are part of the future land use scenario that we start to run when we run the models.
Okay.
So a lot of those areas that will become not potential storage for water are then reduced from the assessment. And yes, that there is increased risks that we can map as a result of that.
Yeah. And the last question is that since there's a lot of organizations that are working on this issue, is there a central place where one can learn about what's going on, where you have your studies? Army Corps, we heard about a minute ago, is doing things, and I'm sure various universities are doing their own, and who knows who else. Is there any central depository of all the information that impacts Southwest Florida?
So I think we play a very important role on that, our South Florida Water Management District and BCB, mostly because we can make the bridge exactly on what the local governments are doing and what the Corps is doing, and really be almost like the repository of the best available information for this region. And also look on a more big scale, like especially if you're doing all those changing in patterns, it's good that you look at like not every specific location, but on a more regional scale. So I think we can and should play a little bit more this role. We are young and we are fairly new in doing that, but as an agency, we are very solid, very robust. We have a regional presence, and I feel we can be playing this role of kind of serving as the repository of best available information, studies, and making it and I like this, especially because, one, we need consistency and we need to find a good way to compare those results and see if those vulnerability assessments are saying the same thing. And two, we can also leverage. I mean, we don't need to recreate the same studies over and over. So a lot of the work we do is everything we make, every study, every data, we made it available to the public. We try to advertise as much as possible. We share with local governments, with local municipalities, water control districts. We put everything available online, including the models. We have a repository of models. It's called SMMS, Statewide Management Model System. So, I mean, those are expensive endeavors. We're talking about $600 million just to develop a model for a specific region. So we make all this available, input data, model data in this portal, so that any local government, if they want to redo or do similar assessments, they have it there and they don't have to pay over and over and develop over and over again.
Yeah, that'd be great. Maybe it's more of the water management district rather than the basin would have the greater leverage than us, but I think that's a great point too. So I look forward to thumbing through the information and learning more about things.
Perfect. You know, we
Thank
can
you.
find a way that we streamline the data or findings for BCB. This is something we can think about, certainly.
Okay, Vice Chair Waters?
And I'll be quick. Most of what I was going to ask about already got addressed. So just the feeling is the ground's kind of shifting beneath our feet a little bit, and that the rainfall used to be a constant thing we would plan for, and we'd try and say, all right, what different canal or different weir or something like that, what are the impacts? And now it's, as our system's built out, what we have to look at is as the rainfall increases, look at our level of service studies and go, where are we at more risk with more frequency than we would have been historically? So I just kind of note that that's my takeaway on this.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And I'd like to follow up on that because the BCB vulnerability assessment, how frequently do we conduct one of those?
So between 8 and 10 years, the last one was developed in 2018. We should be being ready to update. And I believe some initial steps are already being done. I think there is work Kent is doing to begin assessing again the basin. So
it's an 8 to 10 year vulnerability assessment, planning horizon roughly.
the planning horizon is about 50 years and it's updated. So let's assume we did the first one back in 2018. So we look at 2070. When we do it again, we're probably going to be looking either 2075 or 2080 as the planning horizon.
Okay, so it sounds to me that the vulnerability assessment is more of a conceptual document.
It is, yes, the vulnerability assessment looks at the vulnerabilities that we have in the basin. So it's a little bit more than conceptual, just because we do run the models. We look at exactly each area in the basin that we see underperformance. So we look at the canals and we see, okay, if we have this combination of change of land use, rainfall, sea level rise, the water, instead of exceeding the bank once every 10 years, we will exceed the bank once every 5 years. So we can see that this is the type of information that comes out of the study. And then we can start thinking about what's the level of service you want to provide to your community in this basin. And that comes with infrastructure investments.
Okay, and that's my next question, the level of service report. Okay, how frequently is the level of service report done?
I consider the level of service the vulnerability assessment. What we do in the South Florida Water Management District that we call flood protection level of service is a vulnerability assessment. It matches all the requirements from the state when the state gets out and say, flood vulnerability assessment is exactly what we are doing. It goes even beyond some of those requirements established at the state.
So those level of service measures are looked at in the same time frame, 8 to 10 years.
Same time frame, yes. We update that. That's so when I was describing to you the recurrence timing and everything, I was talking about the level of service. Yes, there are one thing here in the Water Management District. Vulnerability assessments and flood protection level of service studies are the exact same thing. It's one effort.
Is 8 to 10 years frequent enough?
To be honest, I think this was based also on our staff capacity. We are doing this program on a basin by basin assessment. So we have to run all through the 16 counties, all the basins. And I don't want to make this a very 100% sure statement, but I believe it was also accounting for how many of those studies we can do every year. I believe 8 to 10 is decent. If we see a more serious condition, of course, we'll need to act earlier and be a little bit more on top of that. But I believe what we have, even if we think about the BCB, the first study was done in 2018. There were some projects that were resulting in some infrastructure investment that is occurring. So when we do it again, we're going to make sure that we represent those advances that we did between the first study and now, and look at what new information we might need to bring and if we need more investment. So I would say is okay. It's not, yeah.
Because that informs our capital program.
Yes.
And that is really important to us. And we've been making such great progress on that we want to keep that going. I have another question, just slightly different from what we've been talking about. Your presentation was on rainfall and the rainfall in the future rainfall projections. if I understood your bottom line in the presentation, it was that rainfall is increasing. And at the low end, it's increasing by 12%. Now, that figure seems low to me. And because it's just a big 12%. But can you give me an example? What does that really mean?
Let me try to understand the question. So the best example I can give to you is when we design, let's get the 25 year. We designed the system to handle, I'll guess a number, 6 inches.
Okay.
So I'm assuming the 6 inches is the 25-year recurrence.
Okay.
So we designed the system to handle 8 inches in this area, 6 inches in this area, and move the water and don't cause any overbank flooding, any impact on any of the community. So when we see the rainfall increase, what we need to know is instead of this 6, we need to be 6 times 12%. So it's going to be something around like 6.87. I'm not doing the math quickly here, but I should. But anyway, something around like 6.8, let's assume. So we are going to have to increase the capacity of the system to, instead of handling the 6, to handle the 6.8. So how we do that is increasing conveyance or creating storage. So we need to either store more water, so we reduce the peak to don't allow for canal bank exceedances and all those things, or we have to create conditions that we move water faster.
Well, 0.8 doesn't sound too great a number to me as I hear it spoken. But if as those numbers increase, that would be the 25 storm. That's basically where we operate, I think is what you had presented to us. But if it was like 100-year or 50-year and you add that on top of it, then it would be significant.
Yes.
And so I guess it's all relative to the amount of rain in total. Well, thank you for your presentation. Is there any public comment, Troy?
Yes, Madam Chair. We have one registered speaker here in the room, Brad Cornell.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. Thanks for the opportunity to address you. I'm Brad Cornell. I'm here on behalf of Audubon, Florida and Audubon Western Everglades, and it's good to see you all. It's a great big board now. It's wonderful. You guys have great conversations and questions too. This is very stimulating. And thank you, Carolina, for the great presentation. Lots of good information. I have a couple of brief comments on that, and then I have 5 recommendations, if I could share those with you. This is a really, really important topic, and obviously your questions and your discussion is reflecting that, which is good. I want to praise and support the district's strategies for emphasizing nature-based solutions that Carolina had outlined in some of her slides, including wetland restoration, vegetated dunes, which were in the Army Corps district slide on the strategies on that towards the end, slide 22, and mangrove restoration. Also, I want to praise in that slide and this discussion that Dr. Moran is bringing forward is the importance of storage, water storage, stormwater storage in resilience. And so that comes through wetland restoration. It comes through engineering, like thinking of the C-43 reservoir, which is a gigantic storage facility, and also SERP projects, Everglades restoration. So these are ways to hold more stormwater, to hold more water back. Audubon does have a strong concern that the district's resilience public discussion, like we're having this morning, is tilted towards the flood protection side of the equation. There is a whole nother side that's in the dry season that is very, very important to consider in terms of climate change and resilience. And that has to do with, we have increasing ET, evapotranspiration. We've got increasing intensity of droughts that occur not only here in Florida, but across the country. And we see what the consequences of those are. And the flip side of the flood protection coin is over drainage. And you all have been out to see Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary and the impacts of the drainage infrastructure has on wetlands. And so that is a big, big concern. And so and just recently there was a celebration of a grout curtain wall that was installed around the 8.5 square mile area. I'm not going to be able to finish this. I'm sorry, but if you want to hear it more, you have to give me a couple more minutes. But anyway, that is a strategy to protect people from flooding, but also have Everglades restoration and the Everglades properly hydrated. So we need to be looking at those kind of strategies. So with that in mind, I just want to flag 5 recommendations really quickly, if I may. And I also want to note that you all so
He can have the extra time.
all right, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm sorry. You have been very supportive in addressing through modeling and through the Corkscrew Watershed Initiative, the over drainage impacts to Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. So that effort, we are very, very appreciative of that collaboration with you all, with the district and with the Big Cypress Basin and with your hydrologists and modelers. Some specific suggestions and recommendations that Audubon has for you now is to consider increasing our strategies with restoration of wetlands and sloughs, like the Horsepen Strand restoration, which is a conservation collier acquisition project. You all have been supportive of that, but you haven't actually been participating in that. That would be, that's in Golden Gate Estates. The canals in Golden Gate Estates only have a 1 in 10 year level of service protection. 1 in 10. So Golden Gate Estates is pretty vulnerable in terms of that very large 100 square mile area. And so finding places to put stormwater like Horsepen Strand is really important. Also, removing cabbage palms from your landscape where over drainage has increased the density of cabbage palms. And I was at the South Florida Ecosystem Restoration Task Force meeting yesterday, and driving back on I-75, there was a 25-acre wildfire right next to, on the south side of I-75 in Picayune Strand State Forest. And what was burning? Cabbage palms. They're like little matchsticks all over the landscape, and they're putting fire into the canopy and destroying pines. And this is why the Army Corps just got a report on how to protect red-cockaded woodpeckers in the Picayune Strand Restoration Project. One of the most important things is you need to get rid of some of these cabbage palms. And so if we're going to be a fire resilient landscape in the dry season where there's drought, higher ET, we need to think about managing that sort of dangerous tree, thinking of that sort of issue, not just on canal banks, but wildfire. Also, we need to shift our public water supply to deeper, to alternatives like the Floridan Aquifer, because when you're competing with public water supply, thinking of the Lee County public wells along Corkscrew Road or Golden Gate wells, you're increasing the drainage of wetlands and increasing catastrophic wildfire risk. And water conservation strategies go right along hand in hand with that strategy, which is let's reduce our irrigation demand, let's reduce our turf grass plantings and extent in our Big Cypress Basin area. And finally, we need to improve our stormwater management strategies in urban areas as well as the ex-urban areas like Golden Gate Estates. We need to be holding more water and Mr. Hill, you just mentioned that strategy. We need to figure out ways to every property, even when you build a house, let's keep all the water on that property and more, rain gardens and infiltration on properties. So thank you for listening to those recommendations. They're really important to look at the flip side of the flood protection challenge that we have. And I'm not saying, you look at Fort Lauderdale last year, April 12th, 25 inches of rain in one day, 25 inches, and that was the dry season. That kind of craziness is also challenged on the drought side of the equation. So thank you very much for considering those alternative comments. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your comments, Brad. Appreciate that. And, with Rory Feeney and his team in the room, he can speak directly to the cabbage palm population out there at the Picayune Strand. And, while it's a native tree, in those numbers, it chokes out everything else. And for those of you who have visited the Picayune Strand on the board, you know what he's talking about firsthand. So, it's all in balance. Anything else for Dr. Moran? Okay, anybody on Zoom? I forgot to ask you there, Troy.
No,
Anybody?
we have no hands raised at this time.
Great. Thank you so much for your
Good, thank you.
presentation
And I'll be
today.
happy to come here later and talk about drought. We have studies also looking at that, and we start our water supply vulnerability assessment.
Yeah,
next.
that might be something to put on the
Yes,
horizon,
yeah.
Carolina.
We are definitely far behind a little bit on looking at the dry side, but we are making significant steps there too.
Yes, because it seems like the dry and the wet season are kind of redefining themselves as
Yes.
we go through. We'll have to see if that continues.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
very much.
Okay, that brings us to our first board comment. Anything that you'd like to share with your fellow board members? We'll start with you, Ms. Smith.
I have comment for number 16, but I did attend the Southwest Climate Summit. I don't have detailed remarks on it because Dr. Moran's in the audience and she spoke and she did a fantastic job, but it was very interesting and I would suggest board members attend next year. It was a 2-day event. I could only attend a day and a half, but it was excellent and it mostly about resiliency. Hurricane resiliency and climate science. It was very much in detail and Brad looked like he was really enjoying himself because it was very much data driven and modeling, et cetera. But it was very good just to get the background in that type of information.
Was there anything that you wanted to share to the board that might have highlighted something for you?
Mostly, and you know what, a lot of it was what Dr. Moran just talked about and she did present there. It was fantastic, but
Great.
if it was too detailed, but it was very good. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for doing that. Mr. Hill?
I don't have a comment, but I have a question of a topic that I am personally working on. And it pertains to the Everglades vicinity, which you can visualize as being south of Marco Island, heading south. My question is, where did the clams go, which used to be a very active clam farm in that vicinity? And that obviously ended many, many years ago. So I'm looking for research on that topic as to what environmental issues are preventing clams from establishing themselves. So it's a personal project that has, I guess, an outside impact upon the basin's responsibilities. So that's if anybody has ideas, feel free to share them with me. So I use this forum to ask that question.
Sounds fascinating. Ms. McLeod?
Rachel, is this where I show my, okay. So at our last meeting, we talked about a successful oyster reef project that's happening in Naples Bay that was funded through a partnership with the Basin and the city of Naples. Since then, I found out about another beneficial water quality or oyster reef project. This is happening at the Shops of Venetian Village, and the owner of the village, his name is Jeff Tayon, and he just completed this amazing water quality project where he has placed 215 of these concrete reef balls all along the village. And he's also put in 4,300 cubic yards of riprap. The reef balls, of course, are to draw in the marine life, like the oysters, to help clean out the water filter and clean the water. And then the riprap is to not only provide shoreline resiliency, but then also to create this artificial reef for marine life. And I've got some pictures here so you can see if you scroll down, just so similar to the reef balls that are used in Naples Bay, and then you can keep going down. And that's them placing them around the village. keep going. And that's, you can't see the riprap, but it's back there. And then the next shot is a closer shot of the riprap there. So this project cost Jeff Tayon over $2.5 million. So he took this initiative upon himself. And I asked him, what motivated you to take on such a huge project? And he said, essentially, he has a deep regard for the environment and he wants to do his part in improving it. And I commend him for this. And I bring this to our attention because, there's so many great environmental projects going on, but not only through governmental means, but these generous contributions from individuals. So a lot of exciting projects happening around here. So I just wanted to bring it to y'all's attention.
This is really great. I mean, and he did that for the businesses. The businesses sponsored this
Well, he owns the village and
Okay.
the shops rent from him space,
Uh-huh.
and he just did it to help improve the bay.
Did you get any feel from him on how long it took him from his idea to do it to getting it done?
No, I did not. I can ask him, but I think it was fairly a speedy
Through
process.
permitting and
Yeah.
everything?
Mhm.
Wow, that's great. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. Mr. Romano? Okay, and Vice Chair Waters?
Nothing for me either.
The one thing I have to share with the board at this point is the fact that I had the opportunity to attend the kickoff for the Corkscrew Watershed Initiative and the technical working group. And the kickoff was held at the Big Cypress Basin conference room. And I see Laura Lehman in the audience in the back that is heading up that effort. And it's such a significant effort for our region to look at the entire watershed. And of course, some of this is what Brad Cornell has mentioned earlier about Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. And some of you I know had a chance to get out to Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary to see firsthand that area and to learn more about the hydrology. So I'm very, very excited about this very, very important effort that we're taking on as a board with the initiative. So I just wanted to give a shout out to everyone who was willing to spend their time to be a part of the technical working group. And we had cities and the counties represented, everybody who can get things done at that particular kickoff meeting. So thank you to everyone. With that, we'll start the technical reports. Field station activity report with Andrew Wolf.
Good afternoon. My name is Andrew Wolf, and I'm the superintendent of the Big Cypress Basin Field Station. And I'm here to give an overview of the field station operations, maintenance activities, and the 3-month look ahead. My last update, we had just started Coco 2 overhaul. We had dried in gate number 1, dismantled the structure, and pulled the gate out. Since then, the gate has gone to West Palm Beach Field Station and got refurbished and painted and brought back to the field station. Here in the picture, you see some of our team putting back the seals and the wheels back on it. And we have installed gate number 1 and put the structure back into service. Here we see Miami Field Station's boom truck helping us out with this. Since then, like I say, we've assembled the structure and put it back online. We've also moved on to number 2 gate since my last update and went through the same procedures, drying out the structure, tearing the structure down basically, and bringing the gate back to the field station, dismantling it, cleaning it, and sending it back to the West Palm Beach Field Station. Since then, we've gotten the gate back and we've reinstalled the gate. Here, this is when we were putting the stop logs in. You can kind of see the diver's helmet down there. But we basically have reinstalled the gate and reassembled the structure. Here we see Dre cleaning the rails and where the rails sit, because we'll paint that with a corrosion resistant paint before the gate goes back in. Here's a picture of the gate as it came back. On the left, you see it had the steel guide wheels to it. And the West Palm Beach Field Station fabricates stainless steel wheels on the right, so they'll last much longer. I just want to say thank you to Miami Field Station for loaning us a boom truck and an operator, and West Palm Beach Field Station for doing the gate refurb on it. And as of yesterday, the gate is back in full remote and ready for the wet season. While the downtime between pulling the gate and that, we've been doing our SIP repairs at structures. SIP inspection program, every structure is inspected above water and below water every 5 years. It's a very intense inspection. Last year, they inspected half of our structures, and we have a report this year of what to repair. There was 220 repairs that needed done. But good thing is there were none that really affected the system or the structures. They're all fairly minor, but they are time consuming. So we've been working on that. We're at 50% right now. We're hoping to be at 100% by October, because in November, we'll get the next set for the other half of the structures that are being inspected this year. So it's a 2-year program. Inspect it 1 year, do the repairs the next. So, but we should be at 100% by October. And then our general maintenance is basically our never-ending battle with vegetation on Henderson Creek Airport Road. Here you see our truck saw on the left, taking vegetation out, and our long reach on Henderson Creek. Unfortunately, the more development along Henderson Creek that we have, the more nutrients go in the water, and the vegetation has really increased. So we really have to keep on top of it, besides our other duties. Our Conver boat is actually due to be replaced next year. You really can't get a good picture of this, but it's the hull of the boat upside down. Mechanically, the Conver boat is in excellent condition, but the hull was pretty beat up because of our coral rock in our shallow canals over here. So we found a welding company in LaBelle that basically fabricated a whole new bottom to the boat, which cost $20,000, but yet it saved $200,000 on getting a new boat. So we can push this off for another probably 5 years or more, and which are good savings to the district. One of our projects was to increase the size of our propane tanks. At Golden Gate 1, Cocoa 1, Cocoa 2, and Cocoa 3, they only had 250-gallon LP tanks to run the generators. This would run the generators, say, after a storm event for 3 to 4 days, which we know if we have a direct impact, getting propane delivered 3 or 4 days after a storm is about impossible. So we've increased the size to 500 gallons. You see in the picture the difference in size of tanks. So we can go probably 7, 8 days, plus we can intermittently shut them off and save more propane. So this makes the structures much more resilient and be able to run them remotely after a storm much easier and much longer on the generator. We did our annual hurricane flight. This is where we do a helicopter flight of every canal, every structure and pump station, just to see if aerial view and see if there's anything that we can see in the canals that would hamper flow or cause any issues for the wet season. And I must say our canals look very well. The structures look very good. Didn't find really any issues with any of the canals. And the 3-month look ahead, continue with SIP repairs, the structure inspection program. We've completed the gate number 2 at Cocoa, and we're going to start the Henderson tree removal project probably May to June, probably more in June. And then our delivery of our new Ford Lightning is still on hold. I know last update, I thought it would be here by now, but for some reason it's in Detroit sitting in a parking lot. So I guess when it's on the lot, we'll see it. Yeah, no guarantees. And then for the comprehensive Everglades restoration projects, we had number 2 pump at Merritt Pump Station tore down to put a new pump shaft in it, and we sent the pump out to Southeast Pump to get refurbished. As you can see on the left, the prop and the diffuser show a lot of wear, and a rip in the prop. And on the right is how it's repaired and what it looks like now. So this is Andrea and Josh tightening up the pump, the first section of the pump. So we should have it back together probably in the next 2 weeks and have it back in service for the wet season. We'll be at 100% on our pumps then. The pump stations, Merritt and Miller were also inspected last year, and then we have SIP repairs at those stations. On the left is Andrea and Adam replacing some rusted bolts. We're changing them to stainless steel. That way they'll don't have to be changed again. And then Brent on the right is changing some more rusted bolts as part of the SIP repair at Miller. And 3-month look ahead, just respond to dry season and going into wet season pump orders. Complete the install of the pump 2 at Merritt. Continue SIP repairs and continue training our 3 new employees, which we still have 3 openings out there, but we have 2 in background check. So I'm hoping they get through background check, and we have 2 more employees coming in the next few weeks here. And every presentation I've had a hazard that the pump station people have to watch out for. One was a rattlesnake inside the pump station. One was alligator in the fuel farm. Well, this one was a panther walking across the intake bridge at Merritt Pump Station.
Wow, lucky for
Just
whoever
strolled
saw
across the bridge and in one jump went right over the fence and out in the woods. So that's a nice sight to see out there. With that, any questions?
Questions from the board for Andrew? Thanks, Andrew, for your presentation, and also a special thanks to the whole team out there that's taken care of everything. You know, one thing that's noticeable when you brief is the physical work that your guys and gals do. So thank you for everything.
Appreciate it.
All right, we'll move to the water conditions report with Mr. Brad Jackson.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members. Brad Jackson again, back this time for the water conditions report. And I'll kind of go through a similar report as I've done in the past, but pick up where we left off in February. So as I usually do, I start off with kind of our summary of the rainfall for our year to date so far. So far this year, the story has been we've had more rainfall than normal. That was the story in February. That continues to be the story basically through today as well. So overall, we're running about 150% of normal just for our 2024 year, and that's about a 4-inch surplus from our normal rainfall totals. You might ask how that compares in terms of historical, and so I added a graph on the right there. It's got lots of different colored lines. The red line is this year, and the black line is the average, and this goes back to about 2002. So we're not the wettest dry season we've ever had, but we're ranking up there towards the top 3 so far. So it's not out of the realm of what we've seen in recent history, but it is a little bit more than normal. So with all that extra rainfall, I'm going to back up to February now and talk a little bit. We had some rain that came in after our board meeting we had in February. So to finish everything up here, we ended up in February at almost 220% of average. So it's really quite a bit more than we normally get. And most of that extra rainfall, while it was pretty evenly distributed across our basin and our region, really the Henderson Creek, Lely, coastal very southwest part of our area got a little bit more than everyone else. Fast forward into March. This one brought us almost 5 inches of rain, which is almost 300% of our average. And what's interesting about our March rainfall is that most of the month was dry. Most of the rainfall fell in one rain event, which occurred in October, March 22nd and 23rd, where we got about 4 inches everywhere. There were a few interesting areas that got local maximums of about 7 inches, which is not a normal, that's not a normal rain event for a March time frame. But fortunately, the system, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, the system handled everything well. And really, this rainfall was beneficial, and we almost kept trying to keep all the drops that we could inside the system. But this doesn't break any records either. So we've had wetter years in the past as well. But the story has changed quite drastically come April. So this month so far, we've not really had any rain. We're on track to have the driest April we've had since our records have started here in the basin, probably 90-ish or so. We've only had 0.2 inches of rain area wide. And so there's really no rainfall expected for the rest of the month. So we'll probably update this slide for next year, and now 2024 may be our driest period for the basin. I've got a couple charts here that are different than normal because showing 0 on a rain map doesn't really hold a whole lot of interest. So in the middle there, the different colors represent how many days it's been since we've got a half an inch of rainfall. So the yellow indicates it's been over a month where we've had where it hasn't rained half an inch. And so not just our basin, but you can see the large swaths of the district have that same color and dryness. So it's not just been isolated for us. And also, this was just updated yesterday. I haven't had the drought monitor on the board presentations or hydro reports this year, but this is the first time it's cropped up. We don't in drought conditions yet, but there are some areas of abnormal dryness that have shown up in parts of the district and in Florida. So remember our water year summary. Remember, we measure our water year. It starts May 1st and goes all the way to April. So we're at the last few days of our water year. And the interesting thing to talk about this summary is almost how all of the rain that we got, usually it's very heavy loaded during the wet season and very low in the dry season. This one's almost more averaged out. There's our July rainfall, for example, was only 4.3 inches, and we got more rainfall than that in our March in our dry season. So definitely an unusual time for the rainfall here. But overall, the deficit and their surplus for our region, it balanced almost out. We only have about a 6-inch deficit overall. So overall, everything kind of averaged out pretty well. It's just interesting the way that it kind of was distributed this particular year. So I'll kind of walk through our system now and kind of show what the levels are at each specific water control structures, where they are in terms of historical. And the story here is basically how much water we've saved and not released out of the system during this dry season. So to refresh everyone's memory, the kind of green bands that you see on there is kind of our normal water levels at each of these particular structures. So GG4, for example, is in the middle, the upper part of the Golden Gate system. And normally this time of year, we're well below where we are today. Today is the solid blue line and the green is kind of the average. So we're several feet above where we normally are just because of the excess rainfall. And not just that, but the operations that we've done inside the system to conserve all of that water, to store it. There was some talk about storage today and dry season effects and everything. So operationally, we're doing everything we can to hold the water inside the fresh water side of the system. It helps keep the groundwater recharged, the wetlands hydrated, all of those sorts of things. But the thing I want to, just like Andrew talked about, we're moving out of dry season into the wet season. So we've been doing great holding water levels high inside of our canal system, but we want to start transitioning that so we're getting ready for wet season. We're going to end up getting more rainfall. We want to make sure the system has the capacity to move the water of it when it comes next month, potentially. So what you'll see across all these graphs is basically a downward trend in all of the different lines where we're on target, we're on track to hit more of a normal level inside the very shaded blue band as we approach our wet season. And you'll see that on all of these different graphs. You can see GG4 here, for example. We expect to end up, as we approach June 1st, somewhere more in this area highlighted here, which is just more in track and more in line with what we would expect or want to see come wet season. So more of the same at Cocohatchee Canal here. Coco 3 is on the top, and you can see how high the water levels were maintained at the very top of the range. But with that dry April, the excess water that was in the system, it's no longer really available to move around. So there was no water being moved through the system right here as you see this decline start. So that's a natural recession. And so we're already in places starting to end up where we want to be come wet season. So we're already on that track. There's a lot of talk about preparation for wet season. So I wanted to highlight that here as well. The story continues as you move through the system, move to the east. Vaca Union Canal is also the same. We're just starting to see that trend in the last couple of days, really at Vaca Union number 5, which is the north end of the system, to see that downward progression. And similarly here with Henderson Creek, we're really setting ourselves up well where we've maintained water levels at the upper percentiles of the system, but not so high that we're going to be worrying about wet season coming up. So I want to talk a little bit about Picayune Strand restoration and our operations. Last time I spoke about how much water we moved over the landscape and how much rainfall fell over the landscape. So since that time, the Corps of Engineers have been working and plugging additional land down in the Vaca Union Canal. So the green area on the left of the slide there is what the area that had some type of restoration, full or partial, completed back in February when I presented this before. It's about 30,000 acres. If you add the yellow, which is about how far they've got so far this season, that adds another 7,000 acres. So now you're starting to see effects of restoration, and that canal is no longer really moving water in that yellow area. So the water we pump now also will start to sheet flow through that area. So we pumped 61,000 acre feet of water this water year between those two pump stations combined. If you totaled all that up, you'd be looking at 20 inches of water, give or take, if all at once over that, the whole area, the 37,000 acres. So, and remember, it wasn't an above average year. We were below average in terms of rainfall, especially during the wet season when we weren't pumping much at all. You look on the trends on the right, you can see the different levels at the pump stations. But the thing I wanted to highlight was the bottom part of the graph, which is the pumpage for each one of these. You can see the pumping here in the wet season was very much lower than you would historically see, and we've actually been pumping more this dry season than we did all of last wet season, which is unusual for us for sure. And then you see the same thing at the Vaca Union pump station, the same thing. It's just we're trying to bring the water level down and manage the recession so we get it to a point where we want to start wet season at a reasonable range, not at the very top where everything's completely saturated. And so during, I went along on the helicopter flight, we took some pictures of what was going on out there. And then the Corps has given us some pictures of some construction work as well. So just to highlight, on the top left, that's what the canal plug looks like now after the Corps of Engineers has completed it, fine graded everything. And you can see them there working in the middle of the canal on the bottom right. On the left there, you can see those are the other features, the Picayune Strand off to the southwest part of it, where you've got the southwest protection feature and some new culverts that are put in place that are sitting there ready, primed and ready for the Miller pump station when we can bring it online this upcoming dry season. So to circle back around to what is the, how do we look in terms of water levels throughout the system? Last time I was up here talking to you, all of the colors on here were basically black, indicating water levels throughout the system were completely, they're higher than normal for the time of year. But what we're starting to see now, just like I talked about, is these colors are changing. So we're getting a recession throughout the system. So in the Crew area, these indicator wells, they've moved out of their higher percentiles. So we're more in line with what you would expect to see in the Crew area, which is good because that's a big component of water storage as we move into the wet season. And then on the left, the black indicates water levels are still high, but I fully suspect that as these recessions continue, by the time we get to wet season, you'll be seeing more usual or more normal looking colors as we get primed for flood control season. So in April, usually spend a little bit of time talking about groundwater. This particular year, water levels have remained pretty high everywhere. So there's not really much to talk here about not much story other than groundwater levels are either above or near their historic averages in the Southwest Coast region. So that's a good news story for the dry time of April as we change months and go into our wet season. So looking forward, as far as our precipitation outlook and long range outlooks, Looking at May and this summer, the next month looks like we'll have equal chances, one way or the other. We don't know when wet season will start exactly. We know it'll start at some point, late May probably, but that always changes. The thing I wanted to highlight, and I'm sure everyone has seen on the news and everyone's talked about the hurricane forecast, that's the preliminary hurricane forecast for the season. And so what we've been seeing, our meteorologists are telling us the same thing, is that we're expecting an above normal season, a lot of activity potentially, and that the system, no, sorry, not the system, the Atlantic is going to be more favorable to hurricane and storm development. You've got warm temperatures already in the Atlantic, and we'll probably be shifting from a El Nino to a La Nina, which gives it more potential to develop. But that doesn't mean we'll be impacted directly or anything, or these forecasts can change. So it's just something we know about and we plan for accordingly. And we want to make sure we're primed and ready for wet season in case any of these do happen to come and affect the basin and the district. But with that, I mean, there's no real one leaning way or the other that we're going to have a wet season than normal based on what we have in front of us today. And I'll close there. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Brad. Are there questions for Mr. Jackson? Mr. Hill?
Brad, is there any consideration of water releases that during like at this time of the year where you're holding back water for the needs of the ecosystem in your planning? Or is the ecosystem been so messed up it really doesn't matter? I hate to be sarcastic, but I'm not.
No, that's a great question. So that's basically a Picayune Strand in a nutshell. The reason we're pumping there, we could not pump there, but that water is reserved for the environment that we're pumping today.
Right.
So that consideration to match historical trends, to match that recession, is to make sure that the environment and the sheet flow is reestablished and maintained downstream.
Yeah. Okay, Picayune's that makes sense. But what about some of the other areas that are more of the Naples proper canal system?
So when we have excess water in places, we will move it around to the best of our ability to make sure that it's retained inside the system. Some structures have limitations. Some have only one way out that can send
Yeah, I know.
water.
You can either to the water.
But we use every tool that we can to make sure that we're sending the water to the right location so it's not wasted or goes out to tide. So if we want to move water over to, into like over by Cypress or over by GG4, we have the ability to do that rather than sitting it out through Cocohatchee, for example.
Okay.
Ms. McLeod?
Brad, can you go to slide 11? And this is a simple question. Oh, maybe 12. That one. Okay, so the Corps is plugging these canals and so they're bringing in fill and they.
So no, not for these. So there were spoils, extra dirt left over, and when they originally dug all of these canals, they just left it on the side of the ground, on the side of the canal. So this is just basically pushing that earth back into the canal, and it creates these kind of pools, a plug, and then there's a pool of water, and then they make sure it's all flat and level, so it matches what it used to be.
Okay, good. Thank you.
And to add to that, the reason the canals are plugged is a cost savings, right? Rather than filling the whole thing in, right? So they're using dirt that's actually on site that they get to make a plug versus bringing dirt in from outside, right? Trucking it all in, that kind of thing, and trying to fill the whole thing. So that helps with that. And one thing I learned during my last visit there was how much it takes to actually build one of those plugs. Think of a huge dozer. I don't know how many tons they might weigh, right? Pushing a little shovel of dirt and then rolling over it and continuing to do it until it's strong enough to hold that dozer to go across. Okay, and have that whole plug filled in. So where I think it should happen faster, right? It takes a lot of shovels back and forth until it's reinforced. I don't see any other questions, Brad. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the monthly financial report with Candida Heater by Zoom. Are you there, Candy?
Yes, Madam Chair, how are you this afternoon?
Great, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, thank you. The monthly financial report that is in your packet, you have two in your packet, but the one that I'll be reporting on today is through the month of February. You have January and February in your packet. So through the month of February, the Basin has collected $12.2 million out of a $13.1 million projected budget revenue-wise. So we are at 93.2% of revenues collected. This is on trend. We are at 41.7% of the fiscal year completion. So we have collected, more revenues at a 93.2% rate than, what we have finished thus far in the fiscal year. You have spent $2.3 million. That's mainly within the operations and maintenance of land and works program. And we have 37.8% of our budget obligated at the moment. Your ad valorem is at a 93% collection rate. That is on trend. And a little look ahead as of today, you are at 98%. So you've collected about another 5% of your revenues. By the month of June is typically when you've collected all of your revenue for your ad valorem taxes. So the Basin Board looks very healthy financially. And that concludes my update for you.
Thank you. Are there any board questions for Ms. Heater? I don't see any questions from the board. Is there any public comment, Troy?
There is not, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Heater.
Thank you.
All right, that brings us to general public comment. This is the other chance for members of the public to speak on anything that was not covered in today's meeting that they would like to comment on. Is there any public comment, Troy?
I have no slips here in the room and no hands raised on Zoom.
Thank you very much. This brings us to the final board comment for our meeting, and I'll start with Ms. Smith.
Rachel? We have a little flyer here to share. Okay. So on July 11th, the Naples Area Board of Realtors is collaborating with BCB to do a water cleanup for Henderson Creek Canal. We're working with Lisa and Andrew. We'll probably have at least 50 volunteers, and we have all the supplies, and we'll split up and do some work on the waters, the waterbed, etc. Afterwards, we're going to have a group of, I believe, 6. We're going to go on a boat and actually do some heavy duty cleanup inside the canal. So excited to do that. Feel free to show up if you'd like to help.
Thank you for that. And if I could ask Rachel, if you could email that flyer to me and maybe the whole board, just email that flyer to us. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah,
Thank
definitely.
you. Thank you for coordinating all of that and everything. That's really exciting. And I don't know what my calendar has in July, but if I can make it, I certainly will plan to attend.
And that's rain or shine.
Yeah, rain or shine.
We'll be there. But thank you, Lisa and Andrew. You've been amazing to work with. They've showed up at our offices and work on a subcommittee with us. So it's been they've been immersed. But thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
No, I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Mr. Hill.
I have nothing. Thank you.
Okay, great. Ms. McLeod.
Yeah, I was just going to, it sparked my attention when PJ had talked about the conference that she just attended. Is there any way that we could get a list of conferences coming up for the future so we can maybe plan accordingly? Because I remember when that one came up, I already had something on my calendar.
Yeah, I think that's something, Brad, if you could take that back to Lisa, and just the conferences that would be of interest to the Basin Board. I think that would be a great idea. Yeah, that's resiliency. That was a good one. And I appreciated you attending because then that freed up something on my schedule
No,
and I
awesome.
appreciate that.
Mhm.
You know, we can hand them off too. We can send a representative from the board and so they'll,
But they're so good, though. It's like.
They are.
I
They're really
wanna
great.
attend.
anything else, Michelle?
Just one last thing. I just wanted to thank Brad and the staff at the Audubon for our tours at Crew or Corkscrew. And it was amazing. Your team is so knowledgeable, so passionate about what they do. And it was fun to be out there with them. So I not only learned, but I had a good time with them out there. So thank you.
Great. Mr. Romano? Okay, and Vice Chair Waters?
Nothing for me.
I just have a couple comments. One, thank you to the board members who have been able to work their busy schedules and find some time to do these tours and to get out there in the field and to see things. I mean, that's really great that you are willing and able to do that, because I know how busy everyone is. And also, I'd like to thank the district staff and the Basin staff for all of your great work in putting the presentations together and working with us on the board. It's really an honor and a privilege for me to serve with each of you, and I look forward to our continuing work together. With that, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Our next meeting is Monday, July 8th.